Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of the Machine Shop Mastery Podcast. I think I probably just had an interview with one of the most determined, persevering, gritty guys that I've ever talked with. I got to sit down with Rhys Andersen of Method Manufacturing in Austin, Texas. Rhys has built really quite a remarkable machine shop, but his origin story and some of the stories he tells of buying his first machine that didn't even work. He didn't even realize that it didn't work because he didn't even know to ask the question about it working. He grew up in fabrication work, not really precision machining. And there was just a lot of stuff he didn't know, as many of us go into business the same way. But from overcoming those early challenges to building a business now that is really focused on automation, cross-training, systems, processes, sales and marketing driven, he's really cracked the formula for what it takes to be successful. And I know that you'll be able to relate to just overcoming challenges, learning, being open, being humble along the way is inspiring. So I enjoyed the heck out of it. I know you will as well. So let's get into this really fun conversation with Rhys. Good morning, Rhys. Welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
Good. Glad to be here.
I am glad to have you here too. As I was just saying, I was just doing some reading up on you, and you have a lot of things going on. I mean, from your shop, you're adventuring, you're firefighting, you have anodizing in your shop. You're doing a lot of things both in and out of the shop. So let's start with giving a little bit of background on yourself and your business.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm originally from Montana, and growing up in Montana, I pretty much grew up in a shop. So my dad had a sewer business, and we built a lot of the equipment, vac tanks and stuff like that in-house. We had a big giant metal shop with everything from like press brakes and a little bit of like manual lathes, stuff like that, primarily welding, that kind of stuff. And so just grew up welding, working on things, heavy equipment. And then we also built firefighting equipment for the Forest Service. And then that led me to, go out and do wildland fires. That's pretty much how I paid for my college and did that for, I think, like 7 years. And it was a lot of fun. Got me all the way over to like California and across the states. So that was good.
So what kind of firefighting is that?
Wildland firefighting.
Wildland. Like smoke jumping or just coming in with trucks?
No, I was an engine boss. So I would run an engine crew. And so that was 3 people on a truck typically. And then, anything from like what you call a type 6, which is like a small like brush truck, up to like a type 3, which is like a little bit bigger, 1,000 gallons of water, that kind of thing.
Cool. Very cool. All right. Sorry to continue, please.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah. And then after, I graduated from high school, I was kind of the creative artsy kid at school. And I was trying to figure out, if I was going to take over my dad's business or if I wanted to do my own thing. And ultimately I decided that I wanted to do my own thing. And so I was like, okay, what's creative and what pays well, right? Because I at the time didn't think I could make any money being an artist or anything like that. So I went and got my undergrad in architecture, and then architecture led me to go to grad school for furniture design. And then got into furniture design, and I was kind of talking to my professors, and I was finding out how much they made and like what the job market was like. And I was like, I don't know that this is going to pencil out. So I ended up dropping out of grad school. And then at that time, my girlfriend at the time, she got a job in Austin, Texas as a project manager for a building company. So that led us to get here to Texas. And then, undergrad in architecture, started in furniture design, not a hot job market. So I ended up welding and started a architectural fabrication company and ran that for a couple years until one of the builders I was partnered with, it was my business partner, he ran into some financial trouble that ultimately ended up taking my business out. And so that was a fun experience going through all of that. And then, to kind of recoup and kind of figure out what I was going to do next, I went and worked in the oil field for about 4 years, I believe. So, yeah.
Okay. And then at what point did you start Method Manufacturing?
Yeah, so that started. We had a friend that worked for a semiconductor company, and we'd talk all the time about what he was working on, and he knew I welded. And there was a New Year's Eve party, and he was like, "You know what? Like, you guys should figure out how to make these big parts. We can't find anybody to make them. There's really long lead times." And so at the time, I was talking to a friend of mine at the same party, and like he had a little bit of machining experience from his undergrad. And we were like, let's get a machine and let's see if we can figure this out. They don't look that complicated, right? So at the time, I was still working in the oil field. I was working 2 weeks on, hopefully 1 week off. And then he was also working like power line construction. And so we were like, okay, so we're going to look for a machine. So we start building a building. And then we find this huge bed mill out in the oil field. And at the time, I sent my wife out there to look at it, and she looks at it and she's like, "Well, it's a giant, dirty machine. I don't know what I'm looking for." And so she sends a couple pictures, and I was like, "Well, the price is right, and it's big. It was big enough for the parts that we were trying to do." So, and at the time, I didn't know literally anything about CNC machines. I was like, "It's big. It says it's CNC." So we ended up buying this thing.
Oh, wow. And what kind of scale are you talking about?
Yeah, so the machine itself was 22 feet wide and 15 feet deep, and the table was 98 inches by 39 inches.
Okay.
And there's a couple critical things I didn't ask about was, did the machine actually work, right? So that was probably critical there. And then I didn't even know if you're supposed to, I just assumed all machines had tool changers and that kind of thing. So machine shows up. We actually set it with a crane because we were bootstrapping this thing, and we're like, man, a couple grand to have somebody just unload this from a semi, that just seems crazy. So I called around and I was like, well, this guy with a crane says he'll do it for like this much. We'll just do that. And that was a terrifying experience because they weren't really skilled in picking pieces of equipment like that. So we get this thing on the ground, come to find out it doesn't turn on, doesn't have a tool changer. In the process of unloading this thing, the machine had tilted, and the guys had basically crushed both of the doors in on itself. And so I had this basically this paperweight. And then my friend was like, well, God, my company really wants me to move to Maine, so I'm not going to be able to do the machining. And so at this point, we have this thing set on the ground. Man. We haven't actually put up the full building yet because it was so big. So we'd set it. And then me and my wife actually built the building like around it.
You and your wife.
So I was like, well, I'm stuck with it. I guess I'm going to figure out how to fix it. So we ended up putting a new control in it, rewiring a lot of it. And then I had to rebuild all the doors, and like everything rubber on it was basically disintegrated, put new, like rebuilt the way covers, just like everything. It was like a full build out. Right. And then I started kind of teaching myself like how to machine things, which, went about as well as you could expect it to go. Mm-hmm. So we buy this big machine, and, you expect I got this big machine. I tell people I got this big machine, and they're like, that's great. You got this big machine. That's awesome. Why don't you try out some small parts for us first? And this machine that had a 3,000 max RPM spindle and was huge, I'm doing these little tiny parts. And so
I can imagine.
And then to make these little tiny parts, didn't know what I was doing. So I was like getting an order for like 7 of these things for one of my first orders. And I think I probably made like 20 or 30 of these parts before I had one that was like right. And that was kind of the process. I would, go out and work in the oil field, try to make sure I had all my material ordered and for that 1 week back to start making my parts. And that's just how it went. And as I ran into more problems, I'd, while I'm out working in the oil field in the evenings, I'm researching, okay, this is what I need to get, or this is what I need to figure out how to do. So it was just kind of this process of trial and error until it kind of got built up to the point. And then probably one of the best things that happened to me was we'd finally got to the point where we had enough work and we were doing lots of these small parts, not much big stuff. So we ended up buying a Haas machine. And about a month after I bought this Haas machine, and my whole game plan was like, I got this oil field job. It's going to pay for this machine. I don't actually have to make money, so I can kind of slowly roll into this. Well, then COVID hit and they shut my entire department down. And so I was like, well, I guess I got to get this machine shop off the ground. And
Yeah,
that was
throw
kind
you
of
in the
the
deep end.
impetus that really pushed me to put all my effort into it.
God, that's unbelievable grit, man. You've just had like one thing after another come at
Yeah,
you.
I think the one thing I've learned is you're always going to hit a point where stuff just sucks. And I think you just have to keep pushing through it. And there's always a solution. And so that's just kind of how I've approached things. There's always a problem. And then it's like, okay, well, how do we solve that problem and move forward? You know?
Right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I see that you're like an off-road running guy. You run
Yeah.
across mountains for very long
Yeah.
distances. How have you always done that, or when did you take that up? And how does that? I'm sure the mindset that you need to do that
hmm
must absolutely apply to business.
Yeah, I think so. It was actually kind of like a random story how I got into that too. I had a friend that was kind of going through a tough time in his life. And so he called me and we were like, okay, well, like, what do we need to do to kind of get you back on track? And I was like, I'll do whatever you want, man. And he's like, well, I heard about this guy called David Goggins.
Oh no,
And I was
that's a
like,
good
oh
way to
yeah,
start.
yeah, me too. What did you have in mind? He goes, well, there's this race that I want to run, and I think it would help. And I was like, okay, well, like if you train for it, I'll train for it, and I'll be there on race day. So that's kind of what started that for me. And then it just kind of became one of those things that it was difficult, but it was really rewarding. And so I just
hmm
kind of kept up with it.
Wow, very cool. So I'm just curious, when you said you found this machine in the oil field, was it just in a building, it was just like, or sitting out in the middle of the of the desert, or what?
So it's about as bad as you could imagine. So we go, and in fairness, I did myself actually go look at this. I just I was precision equipment and heavy industrial equipment are two totally different things, and so I should have been really concerned, but I didn't know enough to be concerned. And so this thing was literally on a dirt floor barn, and they'd rolled it in on drill stem, and yeah, it wasn't hooked to power, and that was kind of one of the issues was it'd been unplugged from power so long that the controller went out on it, and just something when it sits that long, there's a lot of work to do to get it up and running again.
So what control did it have, and what did you actually put on it?
So I put basically an upgraded version of what it had, but it had the very popular control known as Fagor 8050.
Okay.
Which made it fun trying to figure out how to run the thing because there wasn't a lot of like, you buy a Haas, right? You can find content on like how to run the thing, right? Where that there wasn't anything. And then the machine itself came with no information. And so we're like, okay, well, we're going to find a manual and figure out how to run this thing. So we pay $1,000 for a manual and it comes back and it's all in Spanish. I was like, well,
Oh no,
that wasn't really what I had in mind, but at least I
Spanish
had,
menu.
yeah. So
Uh,
it had mechanical diagrams, which was helpful in getting it fixed and a lot of translating. But yeah, so that was a fun experience. And then the very first program I ran on it, in the PLC, G0, which is normally your safe position, right?
mhm.
It was inverted. So the first program I run, I set a cardboard box on the table in my vise, and I put a marker in there, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna write my name, and I
Yeah.
hit go, and it just slammed through this box. I hit the e-stop, and then I was like, oh, what just happened here? And so finally, I figured out, that it was inverted, and then it was probably a year and a half before I finally got somebody on the phone from the company, and they're like, "Oh, that's weird that it's inverted. You can just go into the PLC and flip that around." So up until that point, I was manually searching for any G0 any program and changing it out. But yeah.
Wow. Wow, that is cool. That is a cool story. So let's fast forward a bit. Once Method started to get off the ground, give us a snapshot of what the business looks like today. You're ITAR registered, you're AS9100. You obviously, looks like you have still some big machines, but Hermleys as well.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about what the company does today.
Yeah, so right now we still do semiconductor. We do quite a bit of aerospace now. That's probably the biggest area we're pushing in is aerospace and defense work. And then we've got a Hermela HS Flex hybrid cell that we just added probably about 6 months ago now. And so we have two Hermelas in the shop. And that's kind of where the direction we've been going. So we don't do much big work. It's pretty primarily all 5-axis machining at this point.
And how many folks on your team? How many machines?
So we were 6 people at the company right now. And then we got an intern that he's actually going on a trip this summer. So we got a new intern that just started. And then we've got about 7 machines.
Okay, very cool. So is that, and I'm curious, is that big machine that you talk about on your website, is that still the original one, or do you get rid of that thing and upgrade it?
Finally got rid of that thing. It was one of those things where I was like, man, this thing is so old. It was a really good machine. When we got it up and running, it was a good machine. It was slow, but it worked really well and we never had any problems with it. So I'll give it that. It was a really solid machine, but we ended up, when we moved locations, we ended up selling that machine. It was at my on the property where I live, and so it just kind of mothballed in the corner till we found the right special person to take that thing.
Did you make money on it? Come from what you bought it for? So because it was actually running then?
I didn't make money, but I pretty much sold it for what I bought it for, and it made its money, so I was happy just to see it go to somebody that was happy to use it.
That's cool. Yeah, and you cut your teeth on it and learned how to machine, and that's very cool. So you've now gotten into aerospace a lot. How one of the things that a lot of smaller shops are always curious about is how do you break into new markets? How do you go sell? How do you get your foot in the door? Can you share a little bit of what you've done to be successful in that area?
Yeah. Honestly, it's kind of the same thing with how we got into doing the semiconductor work, is that it's all relationships and kind of meeting that person and putting yourself in positions where you can kind of make that stuff happen. And so one of the machine tool vendors we were working with at the time was like, there's this guy that I think you should meet. He seems like you two would hit it off, and he owned a bigger shop. And so we go to Chicago to one of their events, and he's like, I'm going to set you on the bus next to him, and then I think it'll all take care of itself from there. So we're talking to this guy, and he goes, yeah, I used to work at NASA. And I was like, oh, that's cool. My wife's cousin, he worked at NASA. He worked on the spacesuit. And he goes, could you describe him? And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, he was a really tall guy. He got a beard. And he goes, is his name Tim? And I was like, yeah.
No way.
Well, I was his boss at NASA. And so that led to them kind of taking us under their wing and kind of giving us an opportunity, and then working on some of the prototyping stuff for the spacesuit. The big push for them was like, okay, well, if you want to continue to work with us, you guys got to go through the whole process and get AS9100. And so that's kind of what led us there. And then kind of once we learned how to do all that stuff, which, sometimes it's daunting, but if you've got a customer that's willing to say, hey, you actually did this paperwork completely wrong. This is not what we're looking for. This is what you need to do. It's really helpful. And that's kind of what happened with us, where they knew we weren't like really at the level, especially on the documentation, because the documentation thing, I think, is the hard thing to really tackle at that point. You can make a good part, but can you prove it and put all the package together that they want to see? Because when you get to that level, you're selling a part plus some paperwork, and that paperwork's got to be perfect. And depending on who you're working with, it can, be quite a process to put all that together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's wonderful to have such a understanding and supportive customer like that. And so did did that lead to just opportunities with other sort of aerospace and space companies?
Yeah, I think once you have like one person under the belt and you talk to other people, they're like, okay, well, if such and such uses you, then they feel a little bit more comfortable. And then for me, it was a lot of just, reaching out to people, going to aerospace events and stuff like that, and just connecting with people.
Just networking. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you just attend events and just talk with people, or did you exhibit at shows and
Just
stuff?
attend.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
And it's not my favorite thing to do, but it's kind of one of those things that I've found that is kind of one of especially if you're the founder of a business, at least initially, you've got to do it. You're gonna sell yourself, especially when you're starting out. You're gonna sell yourself a lot better than anybody else is. And so, yeah, it's just one of those things that you got to do the footwork and go to the things and be proactive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's probably not the favorite activity of many machine shop founders because they're
Yeah.
sometimes a little bit introverted or just
Hmm.
not inclined to go sell themselves or their products or their services. But yeah, it's essential because
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think it can be hard too, because I think when you jump into those kind of roles, especially if you're the guy that's been making the parts in the shop, it's a little bit of an identity crisis because that relationship that you started, it's not like when I meet somebody, they're like, oh, here's some parts. I mean, we might go back and forth like for a year and a half, 2 years. That was the case with the guy that I met, was like, it's not like, they were immediately like, here's some stuff to work on. we
Mhm.
you know we went and met him, he came and met us, and we just kind of kept this relationship going until we got to a point where they felt confident that we were somebody they wanted to work with. And so I think often when you're making that transition, it's is what I'm doing right now actually paying off, right? And that's
Mhm.
hard because you don't have a part that's finished at the end of the day. You might have made a bunch of calls, and then you might have thought you really hit it off with somebody and you might not hear anything. And so that's, I think, where it's really hard as a shop owner trying to make progress, because the groundwork that you're doing might not show off for a really long time.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's much less tangible than a
Hmm.
part in your hand. You're like, look what I finished. You
Yeah.
know, what do you think finally got them over the edge to decide to send you a PO? Like they needed some level of confidence in you, obviously. What led to that?
Honestly, I think a lot of it's just being like persistent and like reminding them that you're there. And then you're just making sure, that first thing that you do for them is correct. I think that's the moral of the story, is
Hmm.
you just have to be persistent and
Yeah.
keep at it. Yeah.
I keep hearing different numbers, but anywhere between, it requires like 7 to 17 touches with a prospect before they're willing to even, you know, give you an opportunity to do something with them. So yeah, it takes a long time. It's not like one or two calls and they're
Oh,
sending
yeah.
you orders.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So I'd love to stay on that track of like the skill set needed to, own a business and be
Hmm.
strategic and growth and hiring people and building systems. Was that just a trial by error as well,
Yeah.
or did your skills from leading a truck, doing firefighting, was that helpful to you?
I think so. I think because, I mean, my process of how I do things is generally I try to set the high water mark of what I expect, and then like I'm not a micromanager, so like I'll work hard and I'll do the work and kind of show people what the expectation is. So I think to some degree that helps, but putting together and like a real business, at least for me, has been, you make a lot of bad decisions, and as long as you don't make too many big bad decisions, you want those bad decisions to be small and you want to catch them soon enough. Because I mean, I've been through multiple accounting teams, CFOs, that kind of thing, and some of them have turned out really bad. But the thing is, if you at least recognize when things are going bad or they're not meeting your expectation and you deal with them quick enough,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of, at least from a survivability standpoint, because you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make a bad hire. I've definitely done that. And it's tough too, because you might, find somebody that you think is, a rock star and they're not. And that's really painful too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as soon as you figure it out, and I've gotten better at this, is like you got to deal with it right away. And I think that's kind of what I've found is the best advice I can give is just if you talk about it more than once where you're not sure about something or something that's going on, that's probably your trigger to make a change.
Mm-hmm. That's good advice. So these bad hires, and I can totally relate, I've had many. Was they more cultural not fits or skill sets or like some of it, some of both?
I've done both, right? And so I think often, it's tough. You always want to you want to give somebody an opportunity, and so I think sometimes I've weighted that a little bit too heavy, where I've thought, even though this person doesn't feel like have exactly what I need, I think I can turn them into what I need, and I often it's really hard to do. And then I think sometimes, it's hard, especially when you're working in some of the complex stuff that we're doing now, is somebody can say they can do something and, with YouTube and all that stuff, they might have all the right terms and they might interview really well, but they just don't have the skill set to deal with the actual real problems of making a part. Because I think contrary to, like what the greater world would like to think, making a part and getting it to the right tolerance and stuff like that, it's not easy, and not everybody can just, go out there and do that kind of thing. And so that's where, I've struggled is up to this point was finding the right people. When you do find the right people, like right now, our team is incredible and they're way better than I am, thankfully. But it takes a while, and you have to go through, I think, those bad hires to get there. At least that's been my experience. But yeah.
Did you start doing any kind of practical tests in the hiring process with those machinist type folks?
Yeah, I did, and then I would start keeping a lot closer eye on people as well before, especially when you're kind of self-taught and you hire somebody and they're like, oh, I've got 15 years of experience, and you just assume, oh, if they got 15 years of experience, they totally know way more than I do. And now that I've done it so long, it's like I'm much better at spotting and keeping an eye on like what they're doing, and then I just don't set them free, right? The process now is they work really closely with my lead machinist. And when you've got a really good lead machinist and you also have the skills, it's pretty easy to suss out whether somebody's going to be a fit and if they know what they're doing.
Right. In my experience, machinists, that they're kind of a class of their own in terms of hiring them for skill set and expertise, but culture and sort of values fit is so critical, and often where the misfits are. Do you have established core values? Or mission, vision? How do you think about the culture of your business and how that aligns with the people you're hiring?
Yeah. So like one of the things I think sets us apart, and I kind of growing up in a business and seeing how that went, and especially running crews, I don't want to micromanage people.
Mm-hmm.
I tell my employees they operate in an environment of extreme autonomy, right? So I want them to be able to make critical decisions without having to come to me for everything. And then, so I think that helps because people, if they're not used to that kind of environment, they kind of fail out of that pretty fast. And then on top of that, one of the things that we do that's pretty unique is we don't have like set hours. And I do that for a couple of reasons because I got one guy, he's amazing, but he's not a morning person. And so I don't want him showing up in the morning and drudging through it, right? He shows up, he's excited to do his work, he stays late, right? That's great. He keeps the machines running into the evening. I've got other guys that show up really early. And so our requirement is that everybody communicates with each other when they're going to be in and what projects they're working on. And then that's also kind of where that whole software layer comes in, right? Everybody's able to communicate, even if they're there or not. Like we had a guy, he had a sick kid the other day, and he like wasn't planned, wasn't able to come in, but all of his work continued because, we had detailed notes of where he was at, what needed to happen to continue his project on. And I think often, those, hard rules about like, keeping track of where everybody's at all the time, that's because there's a lack of, trust in the people you have. And I think when you have a team like that that communicates really well, they're all adults. They should be able to, work around life and have like a real life. And so that if something, like pops up, it's not like a huge deal for that person to go deal with it and then, pick it back up, when it works best for them, right?
Yeah. Do most of your technical folks like kind of work on their own machine most of the time, or are they just flexing and moving around all the time based on the project? And do they set up and program their own parts, or how does that work?
We do both. So all of our machinists are programmers, but they all are capable of running everybody else's programs and running all the machines in the shop. That was one of the things that we did when we got the Hermos. Originally, we had a machinist that didn't show anybody else how to run them, and that was kind of like his machine. And then when our new lead machinist came on, he was like, no, everybody needs to know how to run every other machine in the shop. And so we cross-trained everybody. And then Hermela came in and gave the excellent training to my guys. And we've even got our, he's 18 now, but at the time he was 17 and he was running the automation cell by himself. And so I think people like to do that because it makes them feel like they're the important person in the shop. But from my standpoint, I would always be stressed. Like if we had a, critical project and my lead machinist is sick and then my customer's calling me and is like, when's this going to be done? And you're like, well, he's not here today, or he got sick, or something always happens. If you have other people that just can hop in, you don't have that issue. So I think that is been a really important thing for us, just that cross training and leveling everybody up into the shop so that you don't have just one super machinist.
Yeah, yeah. Do you formalize that training, like have it documented and like here are the things you can go get trained in and record their training? That might even contribute to like your AS9100 records and stuff.
Yeah. We have training records and stuff like that we try to keep up with, and then we're constantly like, for instance, right now we have a new quality guy that came on like a couple months, or I guess about a month ago now, but he was looking at the quality program that I put together, and he's like wants to rewrite it, and it's like, well, you've been doing this for 20 years, like let's build a better system. It's like it doesn't have to be set in stone. So we're constantly trying to look at, okay, what can we do to make the system better, and then how to get everybody up to speed so that, again, like we want, somebody else to be able to run the CMM and in case he's not there, right? That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about the Hermela training, bringing some people in. Is that kind of how you do it? Like someone from the CMM company comes in and trains the whole crew, or do you have one person that gets trained up and then they train their coworkers, or some of each?
It's been kind of a mix of that. Sometimes it depends on the company you're working with. Like for instance, with like Hermela, they came and did that, and so we did it on site, which was amazing. Which I think would be my preference going forward with everything. Mm-hmm. And then with the CMM, we sent him up there, and then he went through the training. And then as he's gets everything laid out, we're going to start rolling people through.
Nice. Cool. So let's talk about the systems you alluded to with work instructions and notes. Have you built something yourself, or how are you managing that?
Yeah. So originally we started out with like my kind of hobbled together Excel sheets, which actually work pretty well. Mm-hmm. And then we went through kind of testing out like a bunch of different systems. And then right now we're using Fulcrum, which we really like. And one of the things that we like about it is that the ability to, put everything on an iPad. We've got mounts next to the machines where the guys are working off of, and they take pictures and put in notes of setups and stuff like that. And that's come in really handy too, because like, especially if somebody's not there and they're trying to pick up a job, they can look at, okay, so Joe went in and this is how he set it up. It looks like he had some issues on op 2. So this is how he fixed it. And that was a big thing for me because like when it was me and my friend just working in the shop, even with 2 guys, he would be out somewhere and I'd be back on my week off trying to finish up where he was at. And I'd be trying to get a hold of him and be like, I'm doing this how it looks like you programmed it. And he'd be like, oh no, I had to like shim this thing in and tap this over here. And I wanted to eliminate that. And so that's one of the things that the software allows us to do is just kind of leave some breadcrumbs. So we're not, starting from scratch every time.
That's so fantastic. Yeah, that whole concept of not having tribal knowledge, basically, ever, is such a foundational concept that allows so much flexibility and not getting stuck when only one person knows something. And sometimes it seems like a lot of shops don't get to that point until years into their growth. They have these silos of information, these people that are specialists, and then finally they decide to get away from that. And it sounds like you decided pretty early that was really important to you. That's a good takeaway.
The other thing that people do is they just stick with things because it's what's like comfortable. And I think you've got to test a bunch of things out because lots of people there's many different things that are important to them. And so you've kind of got to date a lot of different things and figure out what works best for you. And then, that it just is, I think, important to make that information accessible to everybody, especially right now. I think this idea where people want to be the valuable guy in the shop. There's not enough of us out there. We need to upskill as many people as possible at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So speaking of that, how do you go about finding your folks? Are you tied in with local community colleges or technical schools or?
So one of the things we do is support our local FIRST robotics team. That's actually how we got our last intern. Nice. And then we're looking at working with there's like a new workforce development group in Texas called Swift that we're talking to. And that's specifically focused on upskilling workers for the aerospace industry. And then I think in general, we just need to make it look more exciting and sexy because, you go to these aerospace events and these people that are investing in these companies, they don't even really know what machining is, or what they have in their mind is still like this idea that we're all working in these dingy, dirty factories. And I tell everybody that, my guys are like tech workers. It's, they work on a computer most of the time. It's not dirty, it's clean, and it's a good job, right? And so if we're not, showing people like how creative the industry is, like how exciting it is, the kind of things you get to work on, nobody's going to go into it, right? And I think that's kind of the problem we face now is, we've spent all this time telling everybody, go get a college degree. Well, everybody's got a college degree now, and we don't have people that know how to make things, myself included. I've got a degree in architecture that I've never used. And, had I known that machining was an option, I probably would have been a lot better served going into something like that early on.
Yeah, sure. A guest on a different show just recently was talking about how he connected with a lot of guidance counselors and would go, meet with them and go to this high school and, coordinate tours of the students, to come to his shop, and has had a lot of success because oftentimes those people are pretty influential in steering, the conversation of kids when they're just sitting in their office like, yeah, I don't really know what I want to do. I kind of bored in school, or I like doing stuff with my hands, and it's been a real successful program for them. So,
yeah. I go to some of the workforce development things, and like one of the things I was at recently, the director of the program was talking about, you know, students need to know this is an option if they don't get into college. And I was like, you need to stop talking about it like that. It's not an option if you don't get in college.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
It
not
is a
second.
valid, good career path that, and at this point, you know, I think it's a better thing to go into than even getting a mechanical engineering degree. I mean, everywhere you turn, you got a mechanical engineer. I mean, that's where most of our interns are mechanical engineers, and they've gone through all this school, and they get to the end and they're like, you know what? I actually really liked machining a lot more than I liked sitting in front of a computer doing CAD work all day. You still get to sit at a computer and work on a computer machining. You just get a physical thing in the end, right?
Yeah. Have any of your employees come up through like Mini Baja or Formula SAE? Do you know?
You know, not yet, but
Okay.
yeah, we're looking at working with some of the rocketry programs at some of the
Oh
universities.
yeah,
So
sure.
who knows?
Sure. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know there's a ton of folks, some of my LinkedIn posts that have done really well, just share some of like my background going through the Formula SAE program at my school and just working, all the hours outside of class in the machine shop that the school had. And it's such an incredibly valuable experience to come out actually knowing those things instead of just the theory of how to make things. And I'm sure you deal with that on the side when you're dealing with an engineer that maybe has never stepped in a shop and they send you a drawing and a model of something that's just ridiculously difficult to make. And
Oh yeah,
it's
totally.
like, come on, there's a couple tips we can give you to cut 30%
Oh
of
yeah.
the cost out of your part.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I see you're also a part of ARMA, the Austin Regional Manufacturers Association. Talk a little bit about how being involved in those kind of associations have contributed to the success of your shop.
Yeah, I think they've been like super helpful. We actually, just through going to an event the other day, we got connected with a company that we're probably going to end up doing work with. I think that from that standpoint, it helps, but also like, we went through where we needed to, do some restructuring of the business. And then even in purchasing our commercial property, you kind of are able to pull on all these resources and ask the community like, oh, who's a good real estate lawyer,
Hmm.
who's a good lawyer to put together a new business contractor, that kind of thing, right? And so yeah, you can get some work out of it, but I think also you can tap into these people that have already done what you've done before and then
Mhm.
provide you, the framework to get there, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's been helpful. And then I think going out and being involved in different business communities, you learn, what you're doing is difficult, but these other people, they're not so different than you. And this knowing that it's possible, I think has been really helpful. And that, it's difficult for everybody also
Hmm.
has been nice because you can
Hmm.
kind of, share some
Oh yeah.
war stories and kind of say, oh yeah, no, this has happened to other people too. Like, so I'm not the only person that's made this mistake. I think that's really nice as well.
Do you know Adam Zimmer through that organization?
Yeah, I think I've met him a few times. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he's been on the show and yeah, different origin story, but similar, just a ton of grit and working through hard problems and figuring it out. And yeah, you guys would probably get along great.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I think one of the takeaways, from that perspective and going back to your, networking and going to Chicago and sitting next to this guy, like your network is so critical to your success
Oh
and
yeah.
not
Yeah,
reinventing
definitely.
the wheel and figuring, finding people that can steer you in the right direction or give you advice or make connections for you. So I think a takeaway for me is get out of the shop, go meet people, go get involved, and it'll come back to you in so many different ways.
Yeah, and I think the big thing there is to set things up so that you can do that. And I think that's the hardest point because most guys, especially if you started the shop because you're the good machinist, right? You're hesitant to do that kind of thing because you view your time as, well, if I'm not in the shop making parts, we're not making money. And so for me, that was one of the things that early on I didn't want to be the best guy in the shop, and I'm fortunately am not. I can make a part, but I'm not the best machinist in the world, and I think that's one of the things that kind of freed me up is like, I view my role as allowing people to do their best work. And then that I'll go out and get them the projects so that they can work on challenging things. And so that's been my priority, right? Not in the shop making parts. And that's, it took me a while to get there because there's something really satisfying about working in the shop. It's very, you know what you're going to do that day. You know what the objective is. And, that can be your comfort zone, but, you gotta do that too. And especially, you get to a point where I think what was a challenging transition too is when you're making the parts and you're in the shop every day, it's easy to catch things that like are going to go out to the shop that aren't good, right? And when you are not there every day, that becomes more challenging. And you have to have a lot of more faith in your team, and you're going to go through those mistakes and have problems if you don't get the systems in place. And so that was the critical thing. You build the systems in and set yourself up so that you can do all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that's so good. It's so relevant. I'm glad you brought that up. So how much of your time do you spend doing business development or setting up the systems? Like majority at this point?
Yeah, the majority. I probably last year was probably, the biggest inflection point where I was making on like parts here and there, especially like if we'd get really busy, I'd come in on a weekend and make stuff. And then coming into 2025, it's, I don't make parts and I need to grow the business. That's my mission right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are some of the biggest challenges you're facing today in the shop, in the business?
For me, I mean, it really comes down to the system thing and how do you scale something? Because that's, I think especially to a certain point, you can brute force your way through a lot of stuff. Like you can just work a lot harder and still get a good result. But when you're trying to scale, you can't do that. You get to a point where it's diminishing returns, or you just don't have the time and energy to keep doubling down. You can't keep pulling all-nighters and that kind of thing to do that. So I think, once you decide that, okay, I'm going to grow this and it's going to be a real business that's not reliant on me, that's the harder thing to do. And so that's been where I'm at right now. It's like, okay, you know, at each step of the way, you've got to add another layer of systems, right? And so that's I think the most difficult thing so far has been figuring that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty universal. And some people, I think, get it earlier on, and some just keep, beating their head against the wall, trying to do the technical stuff and not, because you're right. It's like, I sometimes fall into that trap myself in my own job. I'm like, just going to do this thing that I know what to do. I can get a result quickly, and it's less obscure than this other kind of more challenging thing that I'm not quite as good at.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you really step back and think about it, you got to, what do they say? Eat the frog first, do the hard thing.
Yeah.
And get that done, and that'll move the needle. What do you think are some of the best strategic moves you've ever made in the business that have really moved it forward?
One of the things is like leaning into our automation cell, and like that was like a big thing for us, especially as a small shop. But it kind of had the vision that I had was that I don't want to have like tons of machinists and operators and third shifts and that kind of stuff. I don't think anybody really should be. I mean, working like through the night, I don't think it's good for anybody. I mean, I worked in the oil field and I worked insane hours. And so coming from that and all the things I've done before is if somebody's going to work a third shift, it's going to be a robot. And so that was one of the big things that I wanted to do. And as we've figured out how to harness that more and more, it's paid off. And is just cool to see, because it's also, again, it's like freed up our machinists to, leave early on a Friday and keep the machine running so that they can get to a wedding or do whatever, right? I think, people often think of those kind of things and like taking jobs away or that kind of stuff. But for me, I view it as it allows me to have fewer machinists, pay them better, and have like a real life, right? I don't want people working insane hours and not being able to be there with their family or do things, right? And I think that's where the automation comes into play because, if you do want to make this a career that some kid wants to go into over go into like a 4-year degree or something like that, we've got to create a situation where it's enticing and we can pay somebody well and a living wage and they like what they do. And part of that is making sure your environment matches that.
Hmm. Yeah, you posted a couple weeks ago that you achieved 30 hours of unattended production time.
Yeah.
That's quite a lot of time. What are some of the challenges you overcame to be able to get that much, unattended time with obviously a very stable process?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has been really figuring out our tool life, having confidence in the system. And one of the things that was cool is our lead machinist was like, because we were running multiple part numbers during that too. So he was like kind of trying to trip up the machine just to see like if something happens, like what's going to happen next, just so that we all like felt comfortable doing it. So we weren't like, spending the night wondering like, are we going to come back to a bunch of bad parts, like that kind of thing. So I think that was pretty critical there, just kind of stress testing it, not so much for the machine, but just for us, and then kind of figuring it out. And then we try to standardize as much stuff as possible so that we're, using all the same tools and the same programming strategies and stuff like that too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So maybe sometimes giving up a little bit of cycle time just for some more standardization. It doesn't
Yeah.
really matter if it's 20% longer as long as it's just running solidly.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Sometimes people are just chasing getting every second out of a cycle time, but it's like, no, that's, it might win the race. It's not going to win the entire journey.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally.
So the photos you have on your website and your social posts and stuff are really beautiful. Do you just have that artistic eye? Are you the ones creating those, or do you have someone on your team that's like in charge of all that stuff that is because it comes across as like a really nice brand, right? That it's
Yeah, thanks.
professional.
Yeah, so it's kind of a mix. Like, I really like photography, so some of them are mine. Recently, a lot of them are our intern. He really got
Oh,
into
nice.
photography, so he's been shooting stuff. And then I've got friends that shoot photos too. So it's kind of a
Okay.
mix. Every once in a while, like our video and stuff like that. I had one of my friends come in and shoot a video, and we'll probably do the same thing again in the future to kind of update where we're at too.
Do you think that's a pretty important aspect for a shop to focus on?
I think so, because I think so often, you go to these websites of other companies, and it could be anything, right? But you don't get like a feel that there's like a real company, especially you got all these PE firms buying everybody, and I think when you can kind of convey either if it's through photos or just how your website feels, people trust that a little bit more. So I think that's important.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I run across way too many websites that look like they were built in the 90s and never updated since. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
the shops are like, oh, we're not very busy. It's like, well,
And a lot of times those shops are I think the big thing too is like even if you are really busy, you should still focus on it because eventually, that contract might go away or because that was one of the original things I heard of when I got into the business was when I would talk to people, they would say, when you're really busy, that's when you need to go out and still make sure you're drumming up work. Because what happens when you get to the end of those contracts and you don't have something lined up? So just making sure that that's like, it's not a one and done thing. It's something that you're working on all the time. Because you don't want to get to because that's what happens. You get so busy and you're only focused on getting stuff out the door. And then you get to the end of the project and then you're like, oh, we don't have anything to work on right now.
I
So
learned that many times the hard way. And,
yep.
the worst of it was after, well, sort of during the 9/11 time, when we started our shop in 97, and we're quite busy and growing quickly all the way through 2001 and early 2002. And then it just dropped off a cliff. And, but we had never really done that much sales and marketing. It just kind of fell in our lap. And we learned you always have to be a sales and marketing driven organization to be able to keep that pipeline full, because those months where it falls off a cliff and you don't even have enough revenue to cover your overhead is brutal on your bank account. And it's just, that cycle is just vicious. And, but yeah, I did the same exact thing. Go out, do some selling, help get the job out the door, not have work, go do some selling, work comes in. Yeah. It's just, so I'm glad you talked about that, because I think it's a lesson we got to just keep drilling into the heads of everyone that's, working in the machining industry and small businesses, that's just such a critical aspect of long-term success and viability and steadiness and positive cash flow and everything that goes into, creating more jobs and having a viable long-term enduring business. So.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, awesome. Well, maybe I'll ask you just real quickly, you brought in-house anodizing. That is not something that most shops do. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that's it's an ongoing experiment.
Okay.
But we ended up sending one of our team members to a school to learn how to do it. And then for us, I view that kind of thing as, from a per part cost, anodizing isn't a significant thing, but it's also been the biggest pain point for us. Whether it's, you could have a great anodizer and somebody drops a box and dents a part, right? It's like every time that part's going somewhere or moving, you're introducing some error that, could come back and affect your lead time. So I ultimately would like to control that. But I think for us, one of the things that we learned is, especially because we're not like an anodizing company, right?
Sure.
Is I want that process to be automated and streamlined. So that's something we're still actively working on trying to figure out how to do. But yeah, it just is a great way to give your guys in the shop back a little bit more time to work with the parts.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those things that it's not sexy. It's not probably the funnest thing, but it's really crucial. So it's something I'm going to look into more and more into the future.
So are you delivering parts that you've anodized, or is it still just more experimentation?
Yeah, we have. We've done it for probably 2 years now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right now, we're only doing clear. We need to get a bigger chiller to do the Type 3. But yeah, I think it's a interesting thing, and I think it helps us get stuff out the door.
Yeah, well, it's such a bottleneck in the industry right now. There's so few good companies, and like you said, every step adds more potential risk and error and waste and danger to completing your parts on time. So that's cool that you're taking that into your own hands. And if your past is any indication, like with that machine you first bought, you'll figure this out, you'll make it work, you'll automate it, and it'll be running smooth at some point in the future. So that's a long-term bet. Any just last parting words on things you would suggest that other shops that want to be successful need to focus on and do besides what you've already shared?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that helps out, especially right now when you're starting out, is try to figure out something that is your kind of entry into the market. You see a lot of shops have a lot of the same capability. And so one of the things that I think really helped us out, or at least got people to talk to us, was we had this giant machine. And most of those people didn't buy giant parts from us, but it was a differentiator that stuck with people. So just finding something that sets you apart. I mean, it could be, a challenging material. I think that's a little bit harder because everybody says they can do the challenging stuff, but just coming up with something that gives you some stickiness to the customer, that they're like, oh, you're that guy that has that thing, right? Because that's really what you're trying to get people to do, is remember that you exist and giving them something, some sort of story that holds, really helps out.
Yeah. Yeah. That's sage advice. There's so much competition and so much sameness out there that
Yeah.
figure out how to stand out is a challenge. Well, Rhys, thank you so much for this time. If people want to reach out to you to learn more, or connect, or send you an RFQ, how do they suggest they reach out?
LinkedIn is great. There's a portal on our website if you want to upload parts or that kind of thing, and we can take a look at it. But yeah, happy to connect.
And your website is methodmfg.com.
Yep.
That's a nice website URL. Good job
Thanks.
getting that.
Yeah.
There's no dashes, no hyphens. It's not super long. Awesome. Well, Rhys, again, thank you so much. This has been super informative and fun. And I know you've shared a lot of wisdom and things you've overcome that'll be helpful to the metalworking nation. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.